Welcome to my channel Say Kaitos Academy, and today we are going to discuss on the topic residential status. What is residential status and why do we want to know the residential status of an individual? What are the importance कि हम क्यों residential status जानना चाहते हैं? ठीक है, let's begin. रेसिडेंशियल स्टेटस जानने के लिए हमें पहले जानना पड़ेगा who is an resident. ठीक है, तो रेसिडेंशियल स्टेटस इज व्हाट लेट्स डू. Residential status typically refers to the classification of an individual based on their place of residence, where he is staying, okay, which can affect various legal, tax and social obligations. The meaning can vary depending on the context for which we are finding out the residential status of an individual. So where the place of residence, based on that we decide the residential status of an individual, and also the context why we want to know the residential status, that is also vital here. So it affects different criteria like legal, tax and social obligations are there, and so basing on that we have to know the residential status of an individual. Why we want to know? For tax purposes we want to know, for immigration status, for legal domicile. Tax purpose, in many countries an individual's tax liability depends on whether they are considered a resident or non-resident. Residents often pays taxes on worldwide income, while non-residents might only pay taxes on income sourced from within that country. Okay, depending on the matter that whether an individual is a resident or non-resident, taxes levied on his income, right? So residents have to pay taxes on the worldwide income, but non-residents have to pay taxes only for that sources of income which he has derived from that country. So he will be paying that tax on that income in that country from the sources sourced from within that country itself. Okay, so for tax purpose we have to know the residential status of an individual. Next is immigration status. For immigration purposes, okay, residential status can indicate whether someone is a citizen, permanent resident, temporary resident or a visitor. Okay, so whether an individual is a residential status is whether he is citizen of India or whether he is permanent resident, whether he is temporary resident or whether he is just a visitor to that country. And depending on his category of residential status, he will have the rights, also affects their rights, and also the duration they can stay in a country. If he is a visitor, the time will be fixed for his stay in a particular country. Okay, so immigration status is also one criteria for which we want to know the residential status of an individual. Third is the legal domicile. What is legal domicile? Let's know. That refers to the place where a person has their own or permanent home or principal establishment, and to where they intend to return if they are currently residing somewhere else or living somewhere else. For example, a person is a citizen of India but he is residing at present in US, right? So at present he is residing somewhere else, but he has a permanent establishment in India or principal place of business in India, and where he has an intention to return. So this is the legal domicile. To know the legal domicile, we have to know the residential status of an individual. These are the three criteria of which we want to know the residential status of an individual. To know the residential status of an individual, first we have to understand who is a resident of India, right? As per Income Tax Act, we have to know the residential status of an individual depending on his criteria whether he is a resident or not resident. There are some points which you have to consider here. Let's see. Who is a resident? A resident is an individual is considered a resident in a financial year. Which financial year means? Here we will consider from April to March, if they meet any of the following conditions. There are two conditions. If they meet any of the two conditions, then they are resident of India. For example, they have stayed in India for 182 days or more during the financial year, or they have stayed in India for 60 days or more during the financial year and 365 days for more in the 4 preceding financial years. For example, let's take an example. We are considering here the year 2023-24, right? 2020-24. So 2023-24, if we take from 1st April of 2023 to 31st March of 2024 is the financial year, for suppose. So if he has stayed either in 182 days more during the financial year 2023-24, or if they have stayed in India for 60 days in 2023-24, or during the financial years in this financial year, and he is staying 365 days or more in 4 preceding financial years. So in the last 4 preceding financial years, he has been staying here 365 days or more, as well staying 60 days or more in this financial year. ठीक है. So these two condition में कोई भी condition he has to satisfy. तो दोनों में अगर कोई भी condition satisfy कर दिया, either staying in India for 180 days or more during the financial year, or staying in India for 60 days or more in this financial year and 365 days or more in the 4 preceding financial years, if he satisfies, an individual satisfies any of the condition among the two, then he will be considered as an Indian resident, right? And if he does not satisfy, then he is a non-resident. Simply is a non-resident, right? Now these two conditions have been given: 180 days or more, or 60 days, and along with that 365 days in the 4 preceding financial years. Some exemptions have been given. Just for example, however, for certain Indian citizens or persons of Indian origin who are abroad, who are staying abroad, but they are from Indian origin, so like non-residents NRIs, what we call as NRIs, the 60-day requirement is extended to 182 days. Why they have this been given? To make it easy for them to qualify as a non-resident. If they are qualified as a non-resident, then the tax liability will be less on them. Okay, so to reduce the burden on them, it has been extended from 60 days to 182 days. Okay, that is what they have to oblige. They have to either satisfy, they have to stay in India in 180 days or more during the financial year, or they have stayed in India in this year 180 days or more, or 365 days, 180 days or more and 365 days or more in the 4 preceding financial years. This has been done in order to keep them as non-residents. Okay? So these are the first criteria to satisfy whether an individual is a resident or non-resident. Okay. In the context of Income Tax Act of India, an individual's residential status is a critical factor in determining their tax liability. Income Tax Act classifies individuals into 3 categories based on their residential status. Residential status के basis में 3 category में divide किया गया है, and according to that the tax implications fall on the individual's income. The subcategories of residents. First of all, we will satisfy the 2 conditions. See whether an individual is satisfying the 2 conditions which will make him resident of India or not. After becoming a resident of India, if he qualifies any of the 2, then he is a resident of India. And then we will see whether these 2 additional points or conditions, whether he is satisfying or not, so that we can understand whether he is resident and ordinary resident, or resident but not ordinary resident, right? If a person, along with qualifying the conditions for becoming a resident, he satisfies both of the following conditions. What are the conditions? They have been a resident of India for at least 2 out of the 10 preceding financial years. Okay, out of the 10 preceding financial years, he have been staying in India for 2 years. Okay, and they have stayed in India for 730 days or more in the last 7 financial years. In the last 7 financial years, they was been staying 730 days or more, as well as 2 out of the 2 have been resident in India for 2 out of the 10 preceding financial years, right? Now, resident but not ordinary resident. So, an individual who has satisfied the conditions of being resident, along with that satisfies both the conditions of staying in India for 2 out of the 10 preceding financial years and 730 days or more in this 7 financial years, he becomes resident and ordinarily resident. We have to understand very clearly so that we can understand the tax implications, because basing on this residential status, the tax is levied on the individual's income, right? Now the next is resident but not ordinary resident. That means a person is resident, not ordinary resident, if they qualify as a resident but do not meet the additional conditions like 2 out of the 10 preceding financial years and 730 days or more in the last 7 financial years. These 2 conditions he has not satisfied. Then what he becomes? That individual becomes resident but not ordinary resident, right? So it is clear, I hope so. Resident, ordinary resident satisfies those 2 conditions of being resident, any of them 2, and along with that additional condition for becoming resident or resident. And if an individual satisfies only the conditions of becoming a resident but does not meet the additional conditions to be considered as a resident and ordinary resident, then he becomes resident but not ordinary resident. The third case is the non-resident. An individual who does not meet the conditions for being a resident is classified as a non-resident. Simply he does not satisfy those conditions which are referred to for making an individual resident. He is a non-resident. Non-residents are only taxed on income that is earned or accrued within India. So any income which is accruing in India or earned in India, he will be taxed for those income only. The domain now we will see how the tax implications are based on individuals' residential status. Okay, resident and ordinary resident, tax on their global income, that is income earned in India and abroad. So we saw those individuals who are resident and ordinary residents, their income will be the global income. So the global income will be taxed, income earned in India and abroad. So any income they are earning, whether in India or abroad, that will be taxable as per income tax of India, right? And then second case was resident but not ordinary resident. In this case, tax on income, those individuals will be taxed on income earned in India. Okay, any income they are earning in India, that will be taxed along with that, and only on income earned abroad if it is derived from a business control or a profession set up in India. If the profession is set up in India or there is a business which is controlled from India but the income is earned abroad, okay, in that case it will be taxable, otherwise it will not be taxable. And third case we have the non-residents. What happens? The non-residents will be taxed only on income which is earned or accrued in India. Okay, so resident or non-resident, global income will be taxed, resident but not non-resident, income earned in India as well as income which is earned abroad, but if it is earned from any business which is controlled from India or profession set up in India. And in case of non-residents, only income which is accrued or earned in India will be taxable. So the determination of residential status is essential as it significantly affects the individual's tax obligations. So we have understood what is how we know an individual is a resident or non-resident, and what are the criteria to become a resident, ordinary resident, and what are the tax implications, how the taxes income of the individuals is taxed based on their residential status. Okay, thanks for watching.